Okay, so in looking at the night setup of this architectural exterior, what I've done is I've added photometric lights, as you can see, around this scene. Now, the photometric lights are using IES profiles, and if you look at these profiles, you can download these profiles off the internet. Places like Urco and Delta, I believe, are the two most commonly used sites. Let me just pull this in. For example, if you go to Urco, let's see, select English, you can come in and I believe go to their download section, scroll through, and in addition to offering the IES files that we assign to our lights, I believe they could even offer the geometry for some of the light meshes that these lights go with, and also some of the luminary assemblies. So if I wanted the IES information, I could go to IES data. You can also go to they have 3D Studio Max eyedrop functionality. If I wanted to go grab that, and you can see that you can select actually the meshes as well as the IES profiles that you want. So it's real handy to grab this information, and what that does is it controls the strength of these light sources, as well as the provides, not the intensity, but it controls the strength, but it also provides that it's almost like a caustic pattern, the lens properties that you would see if you were using that actual light fixture, where you see these patterns coming out of a light fixture without actually having to enable caustic. So the main benefit of it is that if you download it from these IES profiles from places like Urco or Delta, the light manufacturers, then you know that when you drop these into 3D Studio Max, that your light settings are going to be configured towards a real world light fixture. And so in order to use those, what you'll do is just create a new photometric light. And I'll just make one right quick. Well, I guess I have to go to a different viewport here. So you just make a new photometric light, and in the light distribution type, you'd scroll down to photometric web, and then it asks you for your photometric folder, and you would go and find your IES file and load it in that way. And then once you loaded it in, it would modify the candela values here and configure the light intensity towards the real world equivalent of that light source. So that's what I've done here, is I've created these IES lights. In addition to that, what I've done is, let me go into wireframe. So in addition to these lights on the exterior, I have 3 photometric area lights inside the building here. If let's see, I believe I can isolate this. So what this is, as you can see, it's a large area light. It's 500 inches by 500 inches. And what that does is, instead of putting lights on the interior of this building, because I'm not sure, I wouldn't want to fill this up with a bunch of lights, because the more lights that you have in the scene, generally the longer time it's going to take to render the scene. So instead, I'll put one large light source per floor to illuminate the interior of this structure. And for the color, I'm using Kelvin controls here. I've got this set up sort of like an incandescent light, which the range on an incandescent tungsten light source is, I believe, 2800 to 3200, so I chose 2800 for this light source. The candela value I've got this set up is 2000. There's really no real world equivalent for that. That's just kind of a guess as to what looks right, just because I don't know of a 500 inch by 500 inch light source, light bulb. So I just kind of had to guess whenever you're going out and venturing away from reality like that and making one large light source. You're just kind of on your own to come up with what looks right. So let me exit the isolation mode. So as you can see, I have the one large area light on each floor here that's illuminating the interior. And if you notice these rings along the outside of these light sources, what I've done is enable this far attenuation. And what that does is it limits the reach of these lights. If that's not on, then basically these light sources, all of these light sources, will just provide longer render times, because Mental Ray has to calculate the shadow sampling, a lot of shadow sampling over large areas, when in reality this light source, I really only want to see it in this section here, so I don't need it to calculate shadows out here or out here. To save render time, what you can do is use this far attenuation control on these photometric area lights in 3ds Max 2009. And so I've set that up on each of these, and what I'll do is just enable that. As you can see, I have the control set up where it starts at 60 inches and decays at 240. And I believe that's the same for all of these. I made these the uplights down here. I made those a little bit stronger, so I wanted to see a little more of that. So I've increased the range. Plus, they're setting farther away from the building. Let me go back to my camera view, and I'll just switch back to a smooth viewport here, so it'll speed up the viewport. The other thing that I have here is I have a daylight system in the scene. However, the Mental Ray Sun I've disabled. For the sky itself, if I was using something like an HDR background or a bitmap or something like that to put in a night sky, normally I would just go in and adjust on the exposure control, adjust the unit value here under the physical scale. But for this case, I just wanted to again kind of simulate a sky. So since the Mental Ray sky here isn't really optimized for use as a night sky, I just decreased this multiplier, as you can see, to 0.0002, and then I modified the non-physical tuning parameters to turn it more blue, which would be a negative value here. So what that's going to give me is sort of a dark blue dim skylight. So that in addition to that, I'm using Final Gather here. Again, since this is an exterior, I generally don't use global illumination, even though I'm kind of showing the interior of this structure. Still, global Final Gather does a pretty good job here. I use the high preset, and again, as in the previous examples of the scene, I rendered out calculated the Final Gather at a smaller resolution than my final resolution. So what I'll do is just decrease the size. 600, that's okay. I'm going to sharpen this up. I'm going to use a different image filter here just to give a sharper, crisper image. I'll try Lanczos here. And there's the output from this render. Now, in the example that I show, as you can tell, I've modified this a bit in Photoshop, a fair amount actually. And in reality, I think I went just a little too far because it's a little too saturated in my taste. This one looks a little more evenly lit without the bright purple color from the sky. So what you could do is just take this into Photoshop and adjust the levels like I did with this example. Let me move this over. But you could adjust the levels and even like I put those clouds in the background. as you can see here. And I did that in Photoshop as well. I just used this mask, the alpha mask here, to blend in where the clouds were. So that's a real quick night setup here, as far as or evening setup. So you just put in your lights, and again, I highly recommend using the IES profiles. And then I would not change the values. Once you use the IES profiles, adjust your exposure control to match. And when you're using large area lights like what I did for the interior here, you're just going to have to kind of guess at the intensity, since there's no real world equivalent to that. So again, that's the exterior render. So at this point, I think we're ready to move on to the final section, which will be architectural interior renderings.